The camera zooms in on a bustling upscale restaurant, its ambiance sophisticated yet inviting. The sleek, polished tables and high-end decor reflect the wealth and prestige that the clientele enjoy as they dine. Amidst this polished chaos, the waitstaff moves swiftly between the tables, dressed in black uniforms, their movements well-practiced, precise. But in the midst of the well-dressed staff, one figure stands out, not by appearance, but by how he blends into the background. His name is Jake. He's in his mid-20s, young but already worn down by years of working in the shadows, and despite his hard-working nature, Jake remains just another nameless face to the restaurant's patrons. We see him carrying a tray of drinks, maneuvering through the maze of customers with practiced ease, but no one notices him. He's invisible to the guests, to his colleagues, and especially to Mark, the restaurant manager who stands near the front of the room barking orders, ensuring that everything runs smoothly. Mark is in his late 30s, sharp in his tailored suit and exudes an air of superiority. He's demanding, unyielding, and carries the weight of his position on his shoulders. But despite his experience and authority, he's frustrated today. The evening's VIP event is fast approaching, and the pressure to deliver is palpable. The restaurant is full, and Mark's patience is running out. Jake walks by Mark, balancing the tray of drinks, his face stoic, carrying the weight of his invisible role. Mark, noticing a minor mistake, a slight stumble as Jake passes by, immediately pounces. "Jake!" Mark calls sharply, his voice cutting through the hum of conversation in the restaurant. "Can't you do anything right? You've been working here for years, and you still can't get a simple task like this done properly?" He pauses for effect, scanning Jake with disdain. "Maybe it's time you found a new job." Jake's chest tightens. The words sting more than they should. It's not the first time Mark has criticized him, but it feels different now. Mark's voice, dripping with scorn, seems to echo in Jake's ears as the other staff glance over, some sympathetic, others indifferent. No one speaks up for him. Jake, already used to being overlooked, stands still for a moment, but inside a deep frustration begins to brew. He nods silently, lowering his head slightly as a sign of submission. This is the way it's always been. He takes the abuse, keeps his head down, and continues to do his job. He walks away without a word, the humiliation a constant companion. But as he retreats to the back of the restaurant, something shifts within him. There's a growing sense of injustice, a feeling that he's had enough of being the invisible worker. The camera follows him as he enters the kitchen, where he starts cleaning the same glasses he's cleaned 100 times before. His movements are mechanical, but the fire inside him smolders. Jake's eyes flicker to the clock on the wall. It's almost time for the VIP guest to arrive. As the preparations intensify around him, his thoughts remain clouded with frustration and anger. But there's nothing he can do. He's just another waiter in the background. That's all he's ever been. What Mark doesn't realize, however, is that Jake is not just any waiter. He has been quietly learning the ins and outs of the restaurant business, gathering knowledge that will come to play later. But right now, Jake has no power. He's simply a cog in the machine, the silent observer. But deep down, something is beginning to change. The tipping point is near. The restaurant is now alive with energy. The night's VIP dinner event is underway, and the chatter fills the air as high-profile guests laugh and converse over their meals. The scene is a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing in Jake's mind. The clinking of glasses, the hushed tones of laughter. It all feels so distant, so foreign to him. He's part of the backdrop of this event, never the focal point. Mark moves between the tables, glancing over the guests and ensuring that everything is perfect. His sharp eyes scan the room, calculating and ruthless. But it's clear to see that the stress is beginning to wear on him. The pressure to keep everything running smoothly has left him on edge. As he glances back toward the staff, he spots Jake again, and his frustration flares up once more. Mark strides over to Jake, who is at the back, preparing for the next round of orders. As Jake sets plates on a tray, Mark steps in front of him, his voice rising in annoyance. "Jake, you're still not getting it. How hard is it to keep up with the basics? You've been here long enough to know better." His voice is louder now, dripping with contempt. "You've got a few minutes to get your act together. or I'll have you out the door faster than you can say restaurant industry. Jake's heart races as the humiliation floods back. He feels the eyes of the other staff members on him. No one speaks up and no one comes to his defense. The rest of the restaurant staff seems to just fade into the background. He's always been alone in moments like this, left to deal with the weight of the blame. He wants to say something, to finally defend himself, but all he can do is nod. His face burns with frustration, but he doesn't lash out. That's not his way. He's learned to endure, to take the punches, both literally and figuratively. Mark, still unaware of how deep his words cut, walks away with a quick nod, expecting Jake to follow his orders. But Jake doesn't move immediately. He stands there, his hands shaking slightly. For the first time, he's questioning everything. Why is he still here? Is this what he's destined for? A life of endless service, always unseen, always unheard? He looks around, his gaze falling on the guests at the center of the dining room. They are enjoying their evening, oblivious to the struggles of the staff, oblivious to Jake's silent pain. The disparity between them, the guests in their expensive attire and Jake in his worn-out uniform, is stark. And for a moment, Jake wonders how much longer he can endure this life. How much longer until he snaps? Suddenly, his thoughts are interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Mitchell, the restaurant's owner. The older man walks through the dining area, his presence immediately commanding attention. He's older, in his early 60s, and dressed in a tailored suit that screams wealth and power. Mr. Mitchell is a figure of authority, but there's something in his eyes today, a quiet observation, as though he's been watching from afar. Mr. Mitchell pauses as he passes Jake, offering him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. For a brief second, their eyes meet, and Jake feels something stir inside him, a flicker of recognition, of being seen, even if only for a moment. But the moment is fleeting. Mr. Mitchell doesn't speak, simply moving on to the next table, continuing his silent observation. Jake watches him for a moment, but as the owner moves deeper into the restaurant, Jake returns to his work. But something in the brief exchange lingers in his mind. There was something about the way Mr. Mitchell looked at him, something that hinted at more than just a passing glance. Could it be that he sees Jake for who he truly is? Jake shakes the thought from his mind. Number. It's just wishful thinking. He's nothing more than a waiter, destined to remain in the shadows. The evening progresses and the restaurant is in full swing. The guests are enjoying their meals, the staff is moving quickly, and Mark is overseeing everything with a watchful eye. But the tension between Jake and Mark is still thick in the air. Jake can feel it, the simmering anger, the humiliation that's been building over the past few hours. As the night draws to a close, Jake is assigned to clear the final tables, preparing the restaurant for closing. He moves around the dining room, picking up discarded glasses and clearing plates, trying to keep his focus. But the weight of the earlier confrontation still lingers, eating at him. Mark's words echo in his mind. Can't you do anything right? You're a waste of space. The sting of it is unbearable now. He's been here for years, quietly doing his job, but tonight it feels like everything has changed. He's finally starting to ask himself the questions he's been too afraid to face. But as Jake clears a table near the front, Mark approaches once more, his voice sharp and unforgiving. Jake, Mark says, his tone cutting through the air. That's it. You're done. You're clearly not cut out for this job. Pack your things. Go home. Jake's heart races. His hands tremble as he sets the dishes down. The anger boils over. He feels as though everything he's worked for has been swept away in an instant. No, Jake says, his voice firm but quiet. I've been here for years. You can't just fire me like this. I've worked hard. Mark doesn't even flinch. It doesn't matter. You've proven you can't do the job, Jake. Now get out. I've had enough. As Jake stands there, humiliated and hurt, the room grows quiet. The other staff members watch from a distance, their eyes darting between Jake and Mark. But no one speaks up. It's as though the whole restaurant is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Jake looks down at his hands, his fists clenched. He wants to scream, to shout, to lash out, but he doesn't. He turns away quietly, but as he walks toward the door, something unexpected happens. Jake, a calm voice says, It's Mr. Mitchell. Jake stops in his tracks. He turns around to see the owner standing there, his eyes steady and unwavering. "There's been a misunderstanding," Mr. Mitchell says, his voice firm yet gentle. Mark, still furious, looks at Mr. Mitchell with confusion. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Mr. Mitchell continues, stepping forward, "Jake is staying." The room is heavy with tension. Jake stands frozen as Mr. Mitchell's words echo in his mind. For a moment, everything around him goes silent. His breath catches in his chest. Mark stands a few feet away, his face a mix of confusion and disbelief. No one, not even Jake himself, knows how to respond. Mr. Mitchell steps closer to Jake, his demeanor calm but resolute. "Jake, I've been meaning to tell you something important for a long time. I didn't want to say it like this, but I think you deserve to know the truth. You've worked hard, quietly, never asking for attention or recognition. You've been the backbone of this restaurant. And now it's time for you to understand who you really are." Jake's head spins. He looks at Mark, then back at Mr. Mitchell. The words hang in the air, but Jake can't fully grasp what's being said. "What do you mean, sir?" Jake asks, his voice shaking. "What are you trying to tell me?" Mark crosses his arms, eyeing Mr. Mitchell with suspicion. "I think you're mistaken, sir. This guy, he's just a waiter. You don't need to make up some grand story. He's just a worker." Mr. Mitchell's gaze never falters. "No, Mark, you're the one who's mistaken." He turns back to Jake, his voice softening. "Jake, I'm your father." Jake's body freezes. The world around him tilts, and he feels like he's about to fall. His stomach drops, and his hands tremble. The words don't make sense. His mind races to process what Mr. Mitchell has just said. His father, the man who had been nothing more than a distant employer, the owner of the restaurant where he worked, was his father? "No," Jake stammers, his voice cracking. "That's not possible." Mr. Mitchell nods, his face filled with understanding. "I know this is a shock, but it's true. I've been keeping an eye on you for a long time, watching you grow and proving yourself." "You're my son, Jake." Jake shakes his head in disbelief. "No, no way. This isn't real. You're lying." The room falls silent. Jake stares at the floor, trying to process the information. The truth weighs down on him like a crushing weight, and for a moment, he can't breathe. Everything he thought he knew about his life feels like a lie. How could this man, who's been nothing more than a figurehead in the restaurant, be his father? "I didn't want to tell you this way, but I had to," Mr. Mitchell says, his voice filled with quiet remorse. "You've been working for me without ever knowing who I truly am. I wanted to be there for you, but I couldn't be. I didn't know how to tell you. But now I believe you've earned the right to know the truth." Jake's mind is in turmoil. His entire life, the years of working in the restaurant, the insults, the silence. Has it all been a facade? Was he just a pawn in his own father's plan? "Why?" Jake finally manages to ask, his voice hollow. "Why did you keep it from me?" "I had my reasons," Mr. Mitchell responds, "but none of them are important right now. What's important is that you know the truth. You've always been more than just a waiter here. You've always had the potential for more." Mark, who's been silent up until now, finally speaks, his voice dripping with doubt. "Are you telling me this guy is your son? The same guy who can't even keep a tray of drinks straight? How can you be sure?" Mr. Mitchell turns to Mark with a stern look. "I know exactly who Jake is, and it's time you realize that too." Jake looks between the two men, still processing everything. He's never been so shaken in his life. The restaurant, his job, his entire existence. It all feels so irrelevant now. He feels like a stranger in his own life. The weight of the revelation continues to hang in the air. Mark is still standing by, stunned, and Jake is left to wrestle with the enormous truth he's just learned. For a moment, no one speaks. The silence stretches on as Jake struggles to find his voice. Jake looks at Mr. Mitchell, the man who has just told him he's his father. He looks at Mark, who stands there, obviously uncomfortable with the entire situation. And for the first time in his life, Jake begins to feel something he's never felt before. He feels seen. "I never wanted anything from you, Mr. Mitchell," Jake says quietly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've worked here for so long because I needed to, but I've never asked for anything. I've always just done my job. Mark, still skeptical, crosses his arms and sneers. And what? You think you're entitled to something now? You're a worker, Jake. Nothing more. Jake turns to Mark, a flicker of anger igniting within him. I've been here for 5 years working my ass off, and you've treated me like dirt the entire time. But now you want to make judgments about me? Mark opens his mouth to respond, but Jake cuts him off. No, I'm done. I don't need you to give me anything. I've earned everything I have on my own. Mr. Mitchell, sensing Jake's turmoil, steps forward. Jake, I want to help you. You've proved yourself here for so long. It's time you stopped hiding. It's time you took your place. Jake pauses, considering the offer. This isn't about charity. It's about standing up for what he's capable of. No, Jake says firmly, his voice resolute. I'm not your charity case, but I'll take the opportunity. I'll prove to you and to myself that I can do more than just serve drinks. Mr. Mitchell nods, a sense of pride and relief washing over him. I knew you would. Jake turns to Mark, his face set with determination. You've made it clear how you feel about me, but now it's my turn. I'm done being invisible. This is my moment. Mark opens his mouth to argue, but then shuts it, unable to respond. He watches, his expression a mixture of frustration and regret, as Jake walks away from him and toward a new future. Time passes, and the transformation within Jake becomes undeniable. He steps into the world of leadership that he never imagined possible. Gone is the timid waiter, the invisible worker who took the brunt of everyone's frustrations. Now Jake is not just part of the team. He's an equal. As he walks through the same restaurant, the once familiar atmosphere feels completely different. His position has changed, and with it, his perspective. Jake now sits at the head of the table in the restaurant's executive boardroom. The camera lingers on his face, showing the quiet determination that has replaced the uncertainty of his past. The staff that once overlooked him now looks at him with respect, some of them even in awe. Mark sits across the table, his eyes studying Jake with a new sense of respect. The man who once berated him now sees the potential in him. The tables have turned, and for the first time, Jake feels like he's truly arrived. You've done it, Jake, one of the other executives says, nodding approvingly. You've proven yourself. You're a valuable member of this company. Jake smiles, but it's a smile that's earned through years of hard work, pain, and growth. He looks around at the faces of the executives, realizing that he's not just a waiter anymore. He's someone who can make a real difference in this company. Mr. Mitchell, standing at the back of the room, watches the interaction with a sense of pride. He knows that Jake is more than capable of taking this company to new heights, but he also knows that Jake's true potential is only just beginning to unfold. After the meeting, Jake walks out of the room and stands by the large windows of the office. The city skyline stretches out before him. For the first time in his life, he doesn't feel like a cog in the machine. He's in control of his destiny now, and nothing can hold him back. Jake takes a deep breath, looking out over the city. His journey has only just begun, and he knows that with hard work, determination, and the courage to embrace who he is, he will create a future that's all his own. As the camera pans out, Jake's figure grows smaller in the distance, but his future is clearer than ever before.